Servus.
Servus. Ihr werdet euch wundern, ich kann das Intro in Deutsch machen, denn Erik spricht eigentlich ziemlich gutes Deutsch. Ist ein bisschen eingerostet.
Bitte?
Ist ein bisschen eingerostet. Du hast lange kein Deutsch mehr gesprochen.
Ja, es ist schon 20 Jahre her. Ich wohnte in Österreich für 2 Jahre und arbeite sogar da, aber es ist schon lange her.
Sehr gut. Deswegen der Talk dann in Englisch, aber wie man sieht, er kann sich wunderbar auch in Deutsch unterhalten. Erik, es ist uns eine sehr, sehr große Ehre, dass du dir die Zeit nimmst, heute mit uns zu sprechen. Wir hatten schon einige sehr interessante Talks rund um Flutter und deine Perspektive ist natürlich auch super interessant für uns. Von daher, die Bühne ist ganz deine. Ein herzlichen Willkommensapplaus von euch an Erik. Schön, dass du da bist, Erik.
Thank you all. Wonderful to be here. I hope you all had a wonderful day. I recognize this has been a long day for you all. I have intentionally kept this talk relatively light. I'm going to throw some slides at you here. We're going to talk about Flutter. We're going to talk about the experience getting going, how it felt dealing with the rapid growth in the middle. We're talking a little bit now and where I see things going. But stop me if you have questions. There also should be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So if we haven't met, as Dennis said, I'm Erik. I started the Flutter project about 10 years ago, actually almost exactly 10 years ago at Google, and led the Flutter and Dart teams there until I left in 2022. I've honestly been working on the same problem for most of my professional career, which is just trying to help the world stop writing the darn thing twice. I worked on the web, I worked on Safari, I worked on WebKit, I worked on Chrome for many years before giving up on the idea that we could make the web good enough to do high quality app experiences. Maybe that's gotten better in the 10 years that I've been away, but that is why we reluctantly created Flutter, was to solve that problem. Anyways, I left Google after feeling like I took Flutter as far as I could there, to build the Flutter company, to build a company around Flutter to take it further. And so that's what I've started with Shorebird. This is a company I started about 2 years ago. The first product that we've released is Code Push for Flutter. I'm not actually going to talk about this much tonight, but if you haven't tried it, you should. It's great. If you don't know what Code Push is, it's instant updates. This is a technology that honestly every large app uses on the store with different means. Most of them use JavaScript to do this. But this is how YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, all the big apps on your phone, they all update instantly, often during launch, rather than waiting for you to click an update button. And this is important for large businesses. One, particularly if you're doing a lot of commerce through your app, you don't want to be down. You don't want to be losing $1 million an hour or whatever, just because some bug in your app is now talking to your backend incorrectly, or a third-party service went down, etc. And similarly, just for agility reasons, apps like YouTube need the clients not to be, a year old talking to their backend, because they don't want to run 300 different copies of their backend. Anyway, so we built it. It works great. We have a ton of customers, and we would love to support you too. So check us out if you haven't. Anyways, as I said, I'm here to talk about Flutter, my experiences during the ride that it was and continues to be. I've sort of broken this talk down into 3-4 sections. If you came to my recent talk at FlutterCon, you'll see some similarities. But we're going to start at the very beginning. I guess before I start there, I should say happy birthday. If you didn't know, Flutter is almost exactly 10 years old. Flutter was started last month, 10 years ago. We initially started, the name when we first went public was Sky. Before Sky, it was called Razor. We were taking a Razor to Chrome. So as I think you will, those of you who have been there for the making of new things, you know that often when you start a thing, it is not at all what you end up doing. And that was very much true for Flutter. Flutter started trying to make the web better. we had been working for years to try and make the web good enough to have great app experiences. We've done this in a variety of ways. One of the ways that we had done it is that we had tried to take Android apps and make perfect clones of them on the web. We tried this with the calculator. We tried this with the calendar. We eventually decided it was not possible to either perfectly clone or make it, do it in a way that you could imagine someone other than a 10-year browser veteran ever writing that app. And so we went to make a simpler, faster version of the web by just deleting all the crazy, and that is what Razor started as. That deleting resulted in Chrome running 20 times faster, which was enough to get the attention of the Google CEO at the time, Larry, and we got some funding, and we sort of went off to the races there. We were deleting for a very long time. This is what the sky phase was. Eventually, we deleted so much that we realized we needed to add something back. The problem is the moment you add something, you are no longer the web. Or at least you're 3 years away from being the web. And this was a big point of contention for our team. We lost half of our team as a result of this. The other half went back to Chrome. But anyways, to go back to these early days, we were the web. We didn't have CSS, but we still had Markdown. We wrote in JavaScript. We wrote 3 versions of Flutter in JavaScript. We eventually abandoned JavaScript because we couldn't make it fast enough on iOS. It took 12 seconds to start versions of Sky that were written in JavaScript on iOS. We needed to move to an AOT language, which we'll talk about. Anyways, I gave a whole entire talk on it. There's a QR code. I'll send out the slides, which you can see that the whole talk for more details about that specific phase and how we got there. Early on, say maybe 6 months in, we had this long phase that I was describing of just cutting Chrome to pieces and seeing what we could find. Like we went digging for gold. We sort of assumed that there was this like golden nugget at the center of Chrome. And if we just cut away all the fat, it would be there. It really evaporated. Like there just wasn't anything there. There was a lot of legacy for trying to maintain all sorts of crazy stuff for the web. But in this early days, after we had cut, we started to build, but 6 months in, we were still excited about things like a green square. This was the first public talk. We had recently moved to Dart. Again, because Dart promised us the ability to do ahead of time compiles, which was essential to boot competitively on iOS. We went from a 12-second boot time to a 500 millisecond boot time when we moved to Dart. And that's not because Dart was special. It just simply wasn't an AOT language, which is essential for competing on these small devices. We still used markup at this time. We invented platform channels, which you still use around this. We were still tied kind of weirdly to this experimental OS that was at that time called Mojo. It would end up being rebooted multiple times within Google before it became Fuchsia, which is how it's known today. We had funny features like shake to reload, which we later dropped at this time. Another phase when we were maybe say 6 months to a year into the project, we focused a lot on building something we wanted to use. It was at this time that we found a name for ourselves. We did a trademark search. It was a whole other story, long process. We built a whole bunch of demo apps just for our own use. We built like a fitness tracker. We built a game. We built a stocks app. There was just so much churn still at this point. We divorced ourselves from that sort of OS, and we wrote ourselves native Android runners and native iOS runners, and we started to focus more on iOS and Android. I would say about a year in is when we started to find our first real customers of Flutter. We had found a few sort of random customers, many of whom we never really talked to in the outside world. Like I think one of the like Suez Canal maintenance apps or something was like one of the very, very first apps to ever be written in like Flutter 0.0.2 or something like that. But one of the first big apps inside Google to move was Fiber. So Fiber, this app never shipped because Fiber itself got canceled, but Google Fiber was a program that Google ran in the United States to bring fiber connectivity to more rural areas or more cities. And they had a whole set-top box, and they brought you cable and stuff like that. They had a whole set-top box, and they rewrote that UI from the web in Flutter. And then we're going to ship on these old, MIPS hardware and stuff. Anyways, after that, we started to see more adoption inside Google. Another very early customer of ours was the ads team. So you may not know, but Google Ads is all written in Dart. So like all of Google's whatever bajillion dollars that flows through every quarter, all flows through Dart. This is why they have so many millions of lines of code of Dart, and 1,000+ engineers who work with Dart inside Google. But the ads team was an early adopter of Flutter, and they tried. This was actually the first time that I really started to realize we had something that was worth, there was a spark there. And what had happened here was that this team had an Android app that the ad salespeople would use to track. But some of the ad salespeople had iOS, as happens, and they wanted to experiment with writing the iOS app in Flutter. They did. They took a couple of Android team members. They were going to give them 3 months to do it. And they sat down and they wrote it, and they wrote it in 2 weeks. And it worked so well, and it ran so well that it was sort of this catastrophic success. They canceled the Android side of the team. They moved all of Android over to Flutter. They redid their Flutter, their Android and iOS apps in Flutter. And worked so well. There was a public talk again by the leader of that team. But this was the first time that I really started to see that we had something that people really wanted. One of the first public apps, or first large public apps beyond the Suez Canal and other sort of hobbyist things, was a beer app. You all know this team, or this team rather as Very Good Ventures. We sort of stumbled into this team. They weren't called VGV at the time. It was the same people, but they were working for a different consultancy. They split off and started Very Good Ventures. But this was, again, sort of like a stroke of luck that we ran across this team in the public who were very motivated about Flutter, saw the potential, and this is how we found Hamilton. Here we're almost maybe 2 years into Flutter's journey. It was the first big app. You may or may not have seen Hamilton, or may not have heard of Hamilton. It was a play that was released a decade ago, about in the US. It was a huge deal in the US. But they wrote their app in Flutter, and we had to build a camera integration. We had to build, color matching. We had to build crash reporting. I think there's sort of a theme to this. It turns out when you're building a platform, you got to build lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff. To give you context, this, again, I think is about 2 years in when we did our beta. And this is what we had to announce with. Like, these were the best apps in the world at Flutter, or the best ones visually that we found. We had Hamilton, we had a random Finnish startup, and we had our demo app, our like internal material controls demo app. And we were, announcing at these times, we hadn't even removed news from the Dart language at this point. Like, we had 1,000 packages, which is probably 1/10 or 100th of what Pub has today. We had partial support for all these things. Just to give you context of how, just what it looks like to have built these things sort of slowly and haphazardly, as you find your path. They tell you that you should fake it till you make it. And I found that to be very true. This, for example, was Mobile World Congress. This was the first moment that the world really noticed that Flutter existed. This was a luck, mostly. So Google, that year's Mobile World Congress, I think this was 2018, 2017. Anyways, didn't have anything to announce. And so Flutter was the only thing from Google at that Mobile World Congress. We had no talks, we had no slots, we had no booth. We just had this one picture, which was completely staged. This is our marketing person who was, I don't know, maybe 25 or something at the time, who slapped a sticker on a podium and threw something on a TV and took this picture, which is what ended up accompanying with all the tech articles that wrote about Google's new multi-platform framework. Anyways, it was after that time that really things changed for the Flutter team. And I think at some level we sort of disappeared for a while because it was just so overwhelming. Just the demand from both the outside market but also inside, particularly just pulled us in a zillion directions. So sort of overnight, Flutter appeared on the scene and went, this is the Stack Overflow numbers, which I'm sure there are better numbers. I no longer have access to Google numbers. Overnight, at least it felt overnight, went from not existing to being 2% of Stack Overflow. And we saw a lot of attention outside following Hamilton, and it was just a huge challenge for us to support all that. An early customer that had actually started around the same time as Fiverr, Google early on, the part of Google that understood the value of Flutter was folks who had these funny bespoke devices that might have their own OS. And this was definitely the case of both Fiverr and the Assistant. So the Assistant started working with us very early on. They just didn't ship until maybe 5 years later. But they were very excited about Flutter because it allowed them to replace Chrome on these very low-end devices and thus use less memory and less CPU, and also allowed them to work across multiple OSs because some of their devices had different OSs. Another thing that happened right around this time was we got our first really big customer inside Google, GPay, which again, like Fiverr, has seen product changes since, but they spent over 100 SWEs, I think, working on Flutter for, I think, 3 different GPay apps because they split their apps by region. And this was a lot of demand again on the team, and I think turned the team even more inward than we had been. One of the other things in bringing up a new system like this is that a lot of the infrastructure that you need just doesn't exist. We were building a product that cared a lot about performance, and so we had to have some way to test that. Google is very much about automated testing. This didn't exist. At least it didn't exist commercially. Chrome had built their own performance lab. Android had their own performance lab to some degree. We built our own performance lab, not because we wanted to, just because we couldn't buy one. I'm using this picture was taken back when it was still in sort of a closet before the fire marshal got mad at us and made us move it to another building. But those were the days, and we had to focus at this time a lot on performance, not because Flutter itself was necessarily bad performance, although we did still have some legacy from Chrome. At this time, we were still using Skia. That transition is mostly complete to Impeller, at least on iOS. Skia, like JavaScript, is a just-in-time system. So Skia has an unbounded number of shaders that it will create, because it creates the shaders that you need to draw the picture that you're drawing. This works great for a browser where you don't know what HTML you're going to be sent. It's a terrible fit for a mobile app. And so this was a long fight for us to figure out how to fix this issue in Skia. This was an early attempt, this SKS, the shader warm-up, but with the wrong approach. This is why Impeller later replaced this with, again, an AOT, an ahead-of-time compiled system, where we figure out, oh, you only need these 10 shaders. Great. We will compile them into your app when you compile your app, rather than building them on the fly. We also had a lot of pressure around platform polish. So we had initially started, particularly with teams and apps that really cared about custom experiences. As we grew, we met more teams who just wanted a stock Android experience or just wanted a stock iOS experience. And we had to build all the Cupertino controls and integrate with all these platforms. It turned out to be a lot of work. Another thing that was happening during this time, here we are, I think we're 3-4 years into Flutter, at least at this point, is another team within Google, not even the Flutter team, saw the possibility of Dart, which had been very successful on the web for Google, again, all of ads being written in it, and Flutter, which had been successful at this point on mobile, and wondered if you could, take peanut butter and jelly and stick them together here and make something beautiful. And they did, much to my surprise. They took Flutter and they ported it to the web through this Dart web compile toolchain and created what would become Flutter Web. This saw early market success. You may remember Rive if you've been around the community for a while. It was called Flame, I believe at the time, but it's now called Rive. They use Flutter Web for their editor. They've used Flutter for other things as well. They were a very early adopter. Another really good fit for Flutter Web. Flutter Web has been a persistent difficulty for us to explain. I think it took us years to figure this out. But Flutter Web is very good at apps on the web. And it is very bad at blogs and landing pages and other web-like documents. And so apps that figured that out early, like Rive, like iRobot, had a lot of success. Say if you're building the next Figma, Flutter was very good for you. If you're building your blog or your landing page or whatever, you're going to have a real bad time. Read Along was another app built inside Google, also used Flutter Web around this time. Another thing that was happening is not just that we were seeing an explosion of apps, not just that we were seeing an explosion of users, not just that we were pulled in different directions by these users, we also started to see new platforms. And a lot of this didn't even come from us. Again, like Hummingbird, and this is part of, people ask me, why I believe in Flutter or why I invest in Flutter, why I've spent, so many of my years of my life. And it's really not about Flutter. It's about my belief that multi-platform is inevitable. And it's not just my belief. You just see, I don't know why you all are sitting there, so nicely in, in Germany. People see and believe that having everybody write things twice is just a waste of human life. And so we saw that again, like with Flutter Web, where another team put these two things together and figured it out. We saw companies coming to us and being like, hey, we want to use this thing more on desktop. In the case of Ubuntu, who now ships this as their recommended way to write apps. I don't know how successful it's been in Ubuntu, but I know they certainly, Canonical invests quite a bit in this. Toyota came to us and was like, we want to use this on our in-car displays. And I think have been pretty successful at doing so. We've heard from other car companies, from TV companies. We'll talk some about one of those. And at this time, again, I'm losing track of time because, I don't know, time is a flat circle or whatever. But I think this is 5-6 years into Flutter. We're starting to look like a real product. We have real big users. We have a mostly fleshed out offering, which brings us really to the present and where we are now. So Flutter at this point is very well established, as all know. There are meetings, there are groups, there are conferences like what you're going through all over the globe going on. There's well over 1 million active developers, and that's just per month. There are millions of apps on the stores. Is the number 3 global project by contributors. This is not something like, I didn't write most of Flutter. Again, I think that we, the team of us who happen to be there in the right time in the right place, we're lucky to experience, this flashpoint of demand of people just want to not have to repeat themselves. Anyways, things are very well established. It's everywhere. It is not the default offering yet. We'll talk a little more about that in a second, but it is everywhere. You see it in all sorts of apps these days. And it's continued to grow. I don't know how useful Stack Overflow is as a metric anymore, but Flutter is now 3% and growing in terms of Flutter Stack Overflow total questions. And just this year, the growth has not stopped. Just this year, these are all names who've announced adoption, right? Geico announced their move to Flutter and how much it's brought for them. LG talked about their new TV initiative involving Flutter. Universal talked about moving their parks. Virgin Money, Xiaomi talked about their car. Big companies continue to move to Flutter. And Flutter itself is not stopped, right? We just like that pull of your different directions, Flutter, I think now does have at least a little bit of bandwidth to continue to explore in different directions, correct some of the mistakes that were made. Shaders is another example of, we had baked in a bunch of things sort of early on in Flutter because that was what was possible with Skia, or that was what was needed for those devices. We now have a much more flexible way of expressing graphical excitement like through shaders. You're seeing 3D start to pop up to be possible with Impeller. I think this is still very early, but I think it'll be interesting to see. There's been a lot of clients who have taken Flutter and smashed it together with Unity, because Flutter is happy to take or accept a texture. And so you will see, I think PUBG is one example of this. The Wallace and Gromit app is another, where they'll take a little bit of Unity and they'll take a little bit of Flutter and they'll smash them together to make an app. But Unity is a giant beast. And now you can imagine, or you could imagine, a year from now, 2 years from now, being able to do that same app without having to leave Flutter. Macros, we'll see if they come, when they come, but they are the promised land, or so I've heard, coming down. And obviously there's a ton of excitement around server and a bunch of folks playing in this space. And just in general, the ecosystem is very broad, very healthy. This is just the companies who have Flutter specific offerings. I pulled this a long time ago. It's probably twice the size at this point. There's just a lot of interest. I guess one other thing that I would want to say before I opine, at least briefly, on sort of where we're going from a future perspective is sort of where we are in this model. So this is from a famous book called Crossing the Chasm, which the point of the book is it talks about this disconnect between what your early adopters want and what the sort of the rest of the life cycle of the product is going to want, the majority of users. And that there's this big, that because there's this disconnect, a lot of products fail to make that leap. Well, I'm here to tell you, and I think you already know, Flutter is well established on the other side of that chasm. But I would point out it is still well in the early majority. If you look at your phone, most of the apps are not Flutter. You probably all have a Flutter or two, other Flutter app or two, maybe 10, but like they're still mostly not Flutter. And again, going back to my mission and my values, I actually kind of don't care so much if they're all Flutter. I just want them to all be multi-platform and all be awesome. And we have had to build Flutter to make that possible. But we are still very early. Flutter is still growing, and there's a ton of people who are yet to come to this community. So opining about what's next, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but maybe this is at least fodder for some Q&A. I think there are a bunch of positive changes on the horizon, market forces coming that I think are really good for Flutter. One of those, for example, is more platforms. This one is maybe somewhat of a double-edged sword. There will be new platforms, whether it's screens on my shoelaces or this product from Apple or the AR glasses from Facebook or who knows what, or screens and spaceships. I don't know. There will be more platforms. They won't all initially work great with Flutter. But if they do have a CPU and a screen, just like we saw with Fiber, just like we saw with Assistant, just like we saw with Toyota, just like we saw with LG, they will eventually all work well. I think another thing that continues to change, and the web changes so much slower than I ever had wanted it to. Again, someone who spent a decade of their life working on making it better. The web is slowly getting more appy, right? You may still not be able to make a perfect replica of the Android calculator or a perfect replica of the Android calendar, but you do have a lot more control than you used to. And with WASM here, with WebGL now well established, I think that this represents a lot of opportunity for Flutter. Another force in the market is that we're going to see more fragmentation. Some of this is going to come from the political side of the spectrum. Some of this is going to come from, other, global forces. But we're going to see more fragmentation within these existing devices, specifically the things you carry in your pockets. And this is actually really good for Flutter. It sounds very selfish to say. I don't know that it's necessarily good for. Well, it's probably good for all of us to see innovation at this level. But it's very good for Flutter because Flutter helps make some of this possible. It helps to allow folks to innovate at the OS level and still, have apps move between. Anyways, you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to also see people experiment with Flutter as a default. There are some complexities here. One of the things that motivated us to do Flutter actually was the failure of the Microsoft phone. I don't know how many of you remember the Microsoft phone, but it shut down, I don't know, 10 years ago, more than. This was a phone that used the web and had their own, way of writing apps, and it failed. And, we felt like one of the reasons that it failed was there wasn't a good multi-platform offering that could have brought some really nice apps to the phone at the beginning. And so we wanted to make it possible for when the next Microsoft phone came around that there would be something, to help it. I don't know if that will ever come to be, but Flutter is definitely around and people are going to try using it as the default. maybe this is QA fodder or not, but I do, this comes up in every talk, honestly, less so in the last few years, but certainly running Flutter for a long time, I would get asked this question all the time: when is Google going to kill it? I think that there is some real risk here, but it's mostly overblown. Flutter is very strongly integrated into Google. Hundreds of engineers use Dart, thousands of engineers probably, certainly if you include the Dart on the web, more than use Swift or some of the other technologies inside Google. Again, my data is old, so that may no longer be true. Google is very invested in Flutter. I do think there is some risk long term. I do think it's good and healthy to see more companies stepping up. This is part of what I'm trying to do with Shorebird. I hope that the Flutter team is very happy for a long time at Google, but if it is ever not, I am building an entity to support Flutter should that ever be needed. I feel obliged by the times to include AI in this. I think AI is a very loose term. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Also has a sense of being overhyped. But I do think that there's some unique opportunity for Flutter. I certainly know that Google is investing a ton here, not just in AI specifically, but also AI and Flutter mixed. I know that Dart is doing some interesting things playing around with dynamic code. We'll see if any of those come to be. I also just think that if you haven't tried these tools, and I suspect that that's no longer true. I wrote the slide a while ago, but if you haven't tried these tools, you should. They really are transformative. We use Copilot for everything. It really does make you faster. Even this old, well, I don't have a beard at the moment, but grayish beard, veteran. Another thing, again, maybe QA fodder, but there was some recent drama around forks, or maybe you're blissfully not online to see it. There are a lot of forks of Flutter, a lot of commercial, professional forks of Flutter. I manage one. Toyota has one, I know. ByteDance has one. And there's going to be more. And I think this is a good and healthy thing for the ecosystem. I think that there's also an opportunity for fork maintenance to be a lot better. It's really quite hard to make your own and maintain your own fork and have it be high quality. I think there's a lot that Google can do here to make it less necessary for you to fork. I think there's also a lot that we as a community can do to make this easier and to play nice together. Anyways, that was my hopefully light talk. I recognize you all have sat in front of slides all day. The TLDR, Flutter has come a long way in 10 years. I think we have a hugely bright future in front of us. As you can tell, I'm still involved in the product. Even though I left Google, it's very important to me that everyone who tries Flutter be successful with it. I talk a lot with, these days, very large companies who are experimenting with Flutter or trying Flutter or use Flutter and maybe want to try Shorebird, that sort of thing. I'm very easy to find on the internet. If you haven't tried Shorebird, you really should. I think it works very well and can be a great help to you, and it's free for small apps. As I said, very easy to find on the internet. Thank you all for having me, and I think we have a little while for questions, and I'm happy to answer anything you got.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. Yes, it's really an honor to have you here, and I'm sure there are some questions that want to be asked. Oh, they are all shy. Okay, there's the first one.
Test. Hi there. I have a question. Flutter currently seems to struggle a little bit since the beginning of the year. I think I never followed as much P1 issues as currently. I think there's not much movement. We have our own P1 issue where I think since 3 or 4 weeks nothing happened. And I want to ask you, what's your experience with this?
Yeah, so I no longer manage the team, but I do know there has been a lot of change and stress inside Google, unrelated to Flutter, but it still affects Flutter in the last couple of years, part of the reason why I left. And I think Google is going through some times of change within the company. I can't speak to the specific P1, although I'd be happy to, in terms of just sending an email. I'm happy to look. Shorebird is not yet to the phase where we maintain long forks for our customers, but we certainly have considered that because we do have the ability to fix things just in our fork. And we've done that a little bit before, where we pulled down things that Flutter hasn't yet shipped because we have a full suite of tests. We run all the same tests that Google does, or most of all the same tests. So I don't know about that specific issue. I can say that there has been some troubling times, not for Flutter specifically, but for Google writ large. You saw some layoffs. Again, those were not targeted at the Flutter team. That just was, collateral damage of being a large organization. So I think Flutter is happy and healthy inside Google. I think it's happy and growing in the market. I really don't think I'm gaslighting you or telling you falsehoods. Maybe my data is just different from yours. But let me help if you want.
Okay, thanks for your answer.
We'll pass it on. There we go.
Hi. So you talked about that you see Shorbert, or you wanted to be more like a general Flutter company, and CodePush being your first product. So I thought, what's your second product?
So there's some debate. We don't plan on a very long horizon yet. I mean, we have mission level planning, but most of our planning is a couple days at a time. We currently think that we might do something like crash reporting, because we definitely get some complaints from our users that the existing crash reporting solutions, even the ones from Google, are hard to wire up, don't always support Flutter as well as they would like. And so they've asked us, maybe we should do some of that. The general sort of vibe is one of, we're just looking for things that solve immediate customer need and are adjacent to our existing products. So, whether that's some sort of, CDN for Flutter, whether that's some sort of key value store for Flutter, whether that's analytics for Flutter, all of these would be for Flutter and for Flutter only. We're not trying to build generic products and sort of port them to Flutter. We're trying to build the Flutter native first-party experience. If you have suggestions, we would love to hear them. As it notes on the screen, we're on Discord 16 hours a day. We run our company in the public. We love your feedback.
What about sorry, just follow up. Do you think also server-side stuff, or integrating with more server-side stuff?
Amusingly, that was what we raised money on. So we raised VC money a couple years ago when we started the company. We initially raised on doing server-side Dart functions. The reason why I never shipped that, you can even go find package Shorebird without the code push. It is on pub. I've deprecated the package, but that was the original thing I was going to ship. The reason why I didn't ship that was the customer feedback I got early on was, this looks great. I'll use it in my next product. And that to me was a scary statement. That is what I heard for 10 years with Flutter. Right? Flutter has been incredibly good at green field and less good at brown field. And by that I mean new applications versus existing applications. 99 of the top 100 or something like that. That's probably not a precise statistic, but it's on that order. It was 19 out of 20 when I was there. Of the top apps on the Play Store using Flutter, all use it in a hybrid app, brownfield scenario. And yet we never did that well. So I wanted to build a product that was really good at brownfield. So CodePush takes you a minute to add to your existing product. You don't have to wait for your next product. So that's why I didn't ship the server stuff. We probably will do Dart on the server, more things like that, but not as our first product.
Awesome, thanks.
Hey, Eric. Do you think it could be possible that Flutter might move into a foundation if other big companies might join, like Adobe or Disney or something like that?
100%. I've been historically against a Flutter foundation, not because I don't think that something like that can work. It's just not clear to me what problem it solves. So I worked a lot on the web, and one of the weirdnesses of the web is that you have these implementing teams, and then you have the standards bodies teams. And so you get this weird design by committee, oh, we imagine this might be good, and so let's write it. You have this side management problem. And maybe that's what Flutter needs. Maybe that would accelerate Flutter. I don't know, but that would not be my first solution. I think that I am really excited about getting Adobe or Toyota or Microsoft or whatever big players to come and participate. And that's the way we did things with like WebKit, right? So Apple and Google shared WebKit until that became untenable. But maybe there was a way in which we could have ended up with a WebKit foundation instead of forking. And I think that once we have another big player contributing to Flutter in a meaningful way, and I think we have some of that with Canonical, we could start to move towards more of a coordination, a third-party coordination.
Thanks.
Hi, you mentioned the Flutter fork and that Flutter could be hard to work with when you have your own version of that. I mentioned in the Flog repository that there's an opportunity to create like patches for Flutter, which you can apply and remove whenever you want, like when in other frameworks, like in node modules and stuff like that. Do you think that could be a good approach, or maybe what are your approaches on making your own fork of Flutter and the tooling?
Forking is very hard. I've done it. Like we forked WebKit. We worked with a fork of WebKit for Chrome, and then we did a full clean fork. It's very hard to maintain a stack of patches, and whether that stack of patches manifests as an SVN branch or a Git branch or just like pile of patch files. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but it's very hard to maintain a stack of patches. Software is not just like you write it and then it's done. Like there's just a constant cost to maintaining. And anytime you add a feature to something or even bug fix or whatever, anytime you make a change to something, you have this constant now uphill battle to keep it from breaking again or to maintain that. And I just think that cost is underestimated when folks fork, when they don't join the existing communal social structures around like, oh, we're going to all maintain this together. But I don't know how I answered your question, but those are some thoughts.
Thanks anyways.
Is it also possible to publish regular new app versions with code push, or is it only meant to roll out app patches?
Yes is probably the answer. So we don't do anything to change the store. So we don't submit to the store for you. But you can change any amount of Dart code. You can add patches, add packages, remove packages. You could rewrite your entire app. The stores would not like that. So I should say there are technical restrictions around Shorebird and there are policy restrictions. Not around Shorebird, sorry, around code push, around updates. So the technical restrictions we've largely covered for you. In fact, we have covered for you. Those are the ways that we execute the code on the devices, need to comply with the way that the app stores want it executed. We've done that for you. The policy restrictions are mostly around that the app stores don't want you to mislead customers. They don't want you to send out an app and then completely change its functionality, either geofencing related or just like, one day wake up and have it be completely different. And so, yes, you can ship whatever you want with Shorebird. You do have agreements that you sign with the App Store saying that you're not going to, turn your kid's game into a gambling app overnight.
So, and this tool basically skips this review process, or doesn't it?
It does, yes. It works just like a web view would. I mean, we don't use web view, but we do the same thing as if you had written your entire app in a web view, right?
Okay.
When you publish to the web, your app, your customers all have that. And this same, web view like technology has been rebuilt. Like Microsoft has a commercial product called Code Push for React Native. All of these apps have their own way. YouTube has their own way that they do Code Push. Google built like 3 different Flutter related Code Push solutions for their own Flutter apps. The thing that we changed was we just made a good solution and we made it publicly available.
Thank you.
Maybe I can add one like personal question. How much of your like time do you spend developing software, and how did that change over the last 20 years?
It's come and gone. So the first year of Shorebird, it was all day, every day. Right now, I don't get to develop at all, other than for fun. I still do a lot of fun development. I don't know. For me, writing silly things in Dart on weekends is relaxing. It doesn't have to be Dart, but that happens to be what I'm using these days. I think that until I became a manager, which was about a year into Shorebird, it was almost 100% of my time. Once I became a manager, I had to start thinking about just all the other things. It wasn't a lot of people management so much. It was just like product management and looking out for all the other things to protect the engineers and let them just keep cranking. I still consider myself an engineer. I just don't engineer in my day job as of about 6 months ago.
Okay, cool. Any questions left? No. All right. Well, Eric, once again, thank you so much for your time joining us today. It was a real pleasure for all of us. I hope you'll have a good day over there. We'll have a good night, and was very great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.